seminars and workshops have also been organized. The association publishes an annual refereed journal with an ISSN number. I take this opportunity to welcome and thank Professor Z.N. Patil, Professor Prashant Mishra, Dr. Devendra Kawat, Dr. Shushanta Vardhan, Dr. Viren Mishra, Professor B.K. Anna, Professor Sudhir Rajiv, Professor Sanjay Arora, Professor Jagriti Upadhyay, Dr. Waliur Rahman, Professor Umesh Singh Ji, Dr. Sanjay Kumar, Professor Sanjeev Kumar, Dr. Sanjay Chawla, and Professor Pradeep Kumar Patra, who have very kindly agreed to share their knowledge with us and spare their valuable time for this program. I welcome all the participants and wish them happy learning in the days to come. I'm thankful to Professor Suman Pamecha, Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, for sparing time for us. Above all, I thank Dr. Rashri Rarawat from Janaran Vyas University for coordinating this program. In fact, it is her hard work that has resulted in the form of this program. Lastly, I thank the President of RASC, Professor Rajul Bhargav, and the entire executive of the association for the approval to hold this program. Now, since the program is beginning today, I would just like to submit that those participants who have joined us would certainly continue with us for the whole program and would also carry out assignments which we will share from time to time so that we can evaluate and finally provide certificates to all of them. I'm sure the scholarly people who would be addressing the participants will certainly make this program a very successful one. On behalf of the organizing committee, all the members of RASC and the Department of English, once again, I express my gratitude to our chief guest, Professor Z.N. Patil, and Professor Prashant Ji for sparing their time this evening. I thank Professor Suman Pamecha Ji, and now over to Manoj for further proceedings. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. As Chandalia sir has talked about, we have two leading stalwarts with us, Professor Z.N. Patil and Professor Prashant Mishra. We look forward to their stimulating talks and interaction with the participants. I'm sure these 2 hours will turn out to be an intellectual feast with a lot of takeaways for the participants. It is rightly said that good books needs no introduction, but we can only get to know about the book when it is introduced by someone. I'm honored to introduce Professor Z.N. Patil. Professor Z.N. Patil, currently the president of LTI, Pune chapter, holds a very illustrious academic profile. He has been teaching English language and literature at several schools, colleges, institutes, study centers, and universities in India and abroad for 47 years. He retired as Professor of English and Head of Department of Training and Development from EFLU Hyderabad. Since then, he has been freelancing in India and abroad. He did his MA, MPhil, and PhD from Pune University, now known as Savitribai Phule Pune University. He did a postgraduate certificate in teaching of English, PGCT, from Central Institute of English and Foreign Languages, CPhil, now known as EFLU, Hyderabad. He was awarded many awards like British Council Scholarship, British Council Scholarship in 1990, and he did a diploma and MA in TESOL from University of Edinburgh, UK. His areas of interest are ELT, English language teaching, pragmatics, teaching language through literature, teaching English to multilingual and multicultural groups, teaching English to speakers of other languages, using support material to teach English, employability skills, motivation, classroom management, teacher development, material development, and new varieties of English. To his credit, Professor Patil has 20 textbooks, 8 resource books, and 80 articles published in national and international journals. He has successfully guided 10 MPhil and 25 PhD scholars, and presently some more scholars are working under his supervision. He has delivered 32 invited and sponsored keynote addresses, and 78 plenary talks at national and international conferences in many countries such as Bangladesh, Britain, Canada, China, Dubai, Germany, and many more. In addition, he has contributed to several seminars and conferences as a panelist and as a moderator. He was invited to deliver special talks and conduct workshops for students and teachers at universities in Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Nepal, Singapore, Thailand, UK, and Vietnam. Professor Patil worked as an English language expert on behalf of the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. His job was to develop spoken communication skills of prospective diplomats at the Institute for International Relations, Hanoi, Vietnam, from 1999 to 2002. Later, from 2003 to 2006, he served as senior English language advisor in Japan. In March 2017, he was invited as a visiting research professor by the government of Taiwan for 2 weeks, during which he guided professors from four universities in Taichung on various aspects of research in language and literature. He has been a senior advisor to 20 online international journals, such as Asian EFL Journal, its sister journals. He is a founding and executive management member of English Scholars Beyond Borders, an international group which organizes international conferences in various countries and publishes papers in online journals. In recognition of his academic and scholarly contributions and services, he has received many awards like Lifetime Membership Award from English Scholars Beyond Borders, ESBB, Outstanding Contribution Award from RAC, Lifetime Achievement Award from North Maharashtra University Teachers Association, Jalgaon, Emeritus Professor Award from Kanya Mahavidyalaya, Jalandhar, Punjab, Best Educationist Award from International Institute of Management and Education, New Delhi, Maharashtra Bhushan, Rashri Chhatrapati Sahu Maharaj State Level Award for Excellence in Education from Milind Sanstha, Nasik, Maharashtra, and there are many more. And above all, Professor Patil is a very humble and genuine person. I had an opportunity to listen to him during lunch and dinner hours at EFLU Mess in 2013 during my PGCD programs. With sincere thanks and appreciation, now I invite Professor Patil to deliver his lecture on pragmatics. Thank you very much, sir. Please, you may come and deliver your lecture.
Yeah, thank you, my dear friend, for a very elaborate introduction. Now, let me at the very outset say a big thank you to Professor Chandalia ji and other colleagues. And I am extremely grateful to Rajasthan Association for Studies in English, as well as Janardhan Rai Nagar, Rajasthan Vidyapith or University for this wonderful opportunity. So I'm extremely happy to be with you this evening. And I'd like to share some of my thoughts, some of my observations as far as pragmatics is concerned. Professor Chandalia ji spoke about different approaches to literature. We can approach literature from several perspectives or points of view. And the point of view or the perspective that I've chosen today is pragmatic point of view, or pragmatic approach to the study of or understanding of appreciation of literature. Now, before I start talking about pragmatics as such, I'd like to spend some time, at least 15 minutes or so, on explaining the basic semi-technical words or terms that we need to understand before we start talking about pragmatics as such. And the first semi-technical word that I'd like to explain very briefly is intention. What do I mean by intention? Whenever I say something, whenever I write something, I have a purpose, I have an objective, I have an aim. And the objective, the aim, the purpose can be to inform people, to persuade them, to dissuade them, to entertain them, to instruct them, and so on. So there is always an intention. The author has an intention, the speaker has an intention. So, when I talk about, for example, intention, I need to talk about very briefly about three different layers of a particular speech act. Every sentence that I utter, every utterance that I produce is a speech act. It's an act and it's a speech act. So What do I do? What exactly do I do when I produce an utterance, when I produce a sentence? For example, I combine the sounds of the English language and I make words with the help of those sounds. And then I combine words into phrases and clauses. And I use those sounds and those words and phrases and clauses to construct or to frame sentences. Now, this very act of combining sounds and combining words and phrases and clauses and sentences is called, in technical jargon or parlance, it's called locution, L-O-C-U-T-I-O-N, right? So whenever we say something, whenever we write about something, we perform a speech act. And the speech act, every speech act has 3 different layers or levels. And the first level that I briefly talked about is locution. I combine sounds, I combine words and phrases and clauses to make sentences. That's about spoken channel. But when I write, I combine letters and make words and combine words and make subjects and predicates and so on and so forth. So that's locution. But whenever we say something or write about something, we have a purpose, as I pointed out some time ago. And that particular purpose is called elocution. I have a meaning, I have an intention, I have a purpose, I have an aim, an objective. So that particular objective or aim or that intention is called elocution. For example, when I say there is a spider on your collar, suppose I say this sentence to Professor Chandalia ji. Professor Chandalia ji, there is a spider on your collar, your shoulder. So what do I mean? What do I want to achieve? Maybe I want to frighten him. Maybe I want to inform him. Maybe I want to direct him to do something. So that is my intention. So the first level is locution, combination of sounds and words and phrases and clauses and sentences, or combination of letters and words and phrases and clauses into sentences. That's locution. And whenever we write something or say something, we have an intention, and that intention is called elocution. And the third level, which is a very important level, is perlocution. Suppose I say to Professor Chandalia ji, Professor Chandalia ji, I feel thirsty. And if he says, okay, if you feel thirsty, you feel thirsty. What can I do? You know, then there is a failure. I mean, my intention was to convey to him that I want a glass of water. This is a kind of request. So I'm indirectly requesting Professor Chandalia to get me to fetch me a glass of water because I'm thirsty. So when he understands the elocution, he goes to the kitchen and fetches a glass of water for me. Then the whole act, speech act, is successfully carried out. So that is the first term that I would like to say something about. The second term is acceptance. For example, the author, the writer, creative writer has a purpose. Whenever a creative writer writes a poem or a story or a novel or a one-act play or something like that, he or she has some intention, and that intention has to be acceptable to the reader, acceptable to the hearer. It may not be acceptable. For example, Salman Rushdie wrote satanic verses, and it was not acceptable to certain communities in India and abroad, in the world. Taslima Nasreen from Bangladesh wrote Lajja, and some of her statements in the book were unpalatable. They were not palatable to that kind of community, that sort of community, and therefore the book was banned. Satanic verses was banned, and even today I suppose it's banned. I'm not sure. And Lajja was banned, and there was, you know, long time ago, D.H. Lawrence wrote novels about physical, sensuous experiences between lovers and even between mother and son in novels like Sons and Lovers or Lady Chatterley's Lover. Even those novels were banned because the intention of the author was not acceptable to the society, to the readership. So the first term is intention, the second term is acceptability, the third one is cohesion. Now, what do I mean by cohesion? Let me give a very simple example. E.M. Forster, in his book, Aspects of the Novel, makes it very clear in a very short manner. For example, he says, the king died, full stop. Then the queen died. In the first instance, he says, the king died, full stop. The queen died. Now, when we read these two sentences, we don't find any connection between the first sentence and the second one, because there is no connection indicator. There is no cohesion marker. The king died, full stop. The queen died, full stop. Then we go one step ahead and we say the king died, full stop. Then the queen died. The very word then connects the second sentence to the first sentence, with the first sentence. What kind of connection is this? The word then, it is a temporal connection, not a causal connection. If we want to indicate the causal connection between these two sentences, we need to use the word therefore. The king died, full stop, therefore the queen died. This kind of connection is called causal connection. This is what I mean, in simple terms, this is what I mean by cohesion, right? Cohesion can be achieved using a variety of devices, variety of strategies. Let me give you one simple example. And this example comes from the story, The Moth and the Star, written by James Thurber, an American humorist. And the story opens like this. I'll just give you one sentence or two sentences from the beginning paragraph, the first paragraph. A young and impressionable moth. It's about a moth who has fallen in love with a star. So this is an exceptional moth. Usually moths fall in love with flames, but this particular moth is an exception. He has fallen in love with a star, right? So a young and impressionable moth once set his heart on a certain star. He fell in love with a certain star. He told his mother about this. Now let's look at this little word, this. It's a beautiful word, this. He told his mother about this. Now, this single word is a substitute for so many other words which have already occurred in the previous sentence. What are these words? A young and impressionable moth once set his heart on a certain star. Now, how many words have been replaced by the word this? That he had set his heart on a certain star. So this little word, this simple word, this, substitutes 10 words, makes 10 words redundant, repetitive, right? Because the sentence is, he told his mother about this. This means that he had fallen in love with, or that he had set his heart on a certain star. So this is one way to make sentences, to make paragraphs and different parts of a story or poem or a play cohesive. So intention, acceptance, cohesion. Coherence is another term that is important in order for us to be able to understand different things in pragmatics. What do I mean by coherence? Here we need to mention speech acts. Certain speech acts are direct speech acts and certain other speech acts are indirect speech acts. For example, let me give you, I have several examples, but I'd like to cite just one short and simple example. Once upon a time, there was an old man. He was a diabetic. He was not supposed to be eating sweets. One day he bought lots of sweets and kept all those sweets in the refrigerator. After a couple of days, he opened the refrigerator and he didn't see the sweets inside the refrigerator. He himself had kept the sweets there, but the sweets were not there. He asked his daughter, "Where are my sweets?" And the daughter says, now the daughter can answer the question. What is the question posed or asked by the father, the old man? Where are my sweets? I had kept my sweets in the refrigerator. The daughter can answer this question directly. She can say, for instance, I finished your sweets, I'm sorry. That's a very direct answer or reply to the question asked by the old man. Or she can be a little indirect and say, I saw Hemendraji standing by the side of the refrigerator. Now, she's not saying that Hemendraji ate the old man's sweets, but she is more or less saying the same thing, more or less the same thing. So she can say, I ate your sweets, very direct answer. Or she can say, I saw Hemendraji standing beside the refrigerator, slightly indirect. Or she can say, for example, I was feeling hungry. She's not committing that she has eaten his sweets. She can say, I was feeling hungry. Or she can say, where are the snows of last year? Can you show me the snows of last year, yesteryear? So I don't know. Or she can be very indirect and say, show me your diet sheet. Dad, show me your diet sheet. What she means by this reply, this answer, this response is her dad, her father is not supposed to be eating sweets. So she is trying to imply and suggest to the father, to the old man, that he is a diabetic and he shouldn't be eating sweets. So in the case of cohesion, the connections are very overt and explicit. We can see the connections in the form of words like therefore or then, in the case of the example that I cited from E.M. Foster's Aspects of the Novel. Or the connection can be at the semantic level or pragmatic level. The connection is not overt, it is covert, it is not explicit, it is implicit. And the reader has to do some kind of exercise, go through some kind of procedure and interpret the sentence properly. So intention, acceptance, cohesion, coherence are some of these terms. The next term that I'd like to say something very briefly about is situation. There is always a situation, whether it's a poem or a story or a one-act play or a full-length play or a novel, there is some sort of situation. For example, let's take The Solitary Reaper by William Wordsworth. There is a girl and she's reaping some, crops. She's in the valley and the poet is listening to the song that the girl is singing. He doesn't understand. He doesn't at all understand the theme of the song because the girl is singing the song in Gaelic dialect. And he's not very much familiar with that kind of dialect. But he can guess what the song is about. And he can guess that on the basis of the tone of voice that the girl is using. And the tone of voice is melancholic, plaintive, sad. So the situation is that there is a girl and she's reaping some crops and she's in the valley and the poet is there, he's listening to her. That's the situation. The situation in Stopping by Woods by E.M. Foster, by Robert Frost is different. The poet is riding a horse, it's evening time, it's a freezing evening, very cold evening, it's a dark evening, and he stops. The horse doesn't know why the master has stopped, right? That's the situation. So there is always some situation or the other in any literary work or in any kind of discourse for that matter, be it spoken discourse or written discourse. So intention, acceptance, cohesion, coherence, situation, information. There is some sort of information. This information is not necessarily scientific information. It can be literary information. And I'm reminded of, for example, I'm reminded of Daffodils Again. The poem gives us emotional information regarding the response of the poet to the daffodils. The daffodils are fluttering and dancing in the breeze and tossing their heads in sprightly dance and filling his heart with pleasure, with bliss. So that is one sort of information, right? That is information related to the emotional response that the poet is giving to the dancing daffodils, dancing flowers. But the botanical description of daffodil flowers given in a book on botany is also information. That's factual information. The botanist may talk about the stem and the petals and the color and the pollen and so on and so forth, as far as this particular flower is concerned. There is some sort of information, right? I. Richards talks about statements and pseudo statements. He says that science makes statements, and these statements can be verified in a laboratory, right? But poetry, literature gives us a different kind of statements. For example, these statements are pseudo statements. Why does he call them pseudo statements? Why doesn't he call them statements? Because statements given in science can be objectively verified in a laboratory, for instance. But statements made in a poem, for example, cannot be tested scientifically, verified scientifically. For example, you can't take a girl to a chemistry laboratory and dip her in some chemical to see whether she is really red like a rose, right? You can't do that. Only a crazy man can do that. So there is a difference between literary statements or poetic statements or pseudo statements and scientific statements. But there is some sort of information. right? The information may be factual or fictional for that matter. So intention, acceptance, cohesion, coherence, situation, information, intratextuality. Now, when I speak, now at the moment I'm saying something and you're listening to me, right? So I'm trying to organize my ideas in a particular fashion, in a particular manner. I want to be cohesive and coherent. Otherwise, you will describe me as a crazy fellow. And you will say, I'm sorry, I don't know what this man is talking about. He's jumping from one topic to another, one issue to another. He's digressing, and it's all chaos. All right? It's like turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. The falcon here means the audience. The falconer here means the speaker. The falcon cannot hear the falconer, right? Things fall apart, right? The center cannot hold, things fall apart, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. You may say this if I am not cohesive, not coherent. So I'm trying to be cohesive and coherent. So I'm trying to connect my points, relate my points with one another, and I'm trying to use different coherence devices and cohesive devices and so on and so forth. So there are some connections between paragraphs of the same text, same semiotic, semiotic representation. For example, I'm reading a short story, and the short story may consist of, let's say, 10 paragraphs. So there are connections between paragraphs and across paragraphs. So that is called intratextuality, right? So cohesion and coherence within the same text is called intratextuality. There is something called intertextuality. And when we write, for example, a PhD thesis, we need to do some literature review. So that literature review is a sort of intertextuality, because we read different articles and different books written on our particular topic, the topic that we are researching or investigating. And we try to find agreements and disagreements between articles, or between the writers of the articles and between the writers of the books. And we try to compare them and contrast them and so on. So that is an example of intertextuality. T.S. Eliot, in his poem called Four Quartets, says, and this is an example of temporal intertextuality, time present and time past. He talks about present, past, and future, or past, present, and future. And that can be cited as an example of intertextuality. Past is one text, present is one text, and future is one text. And I'm reminded of the movie Kal Aaj Aur Kal, in which Prithviraj Kapoor was Kal, yesterday. Raj Kapoor was today, Aaj. And Randhir Kapoor is the other Kal, that is tomorrow. So there is some sort of genetic intertextuality. Prithviraj Kapoor was one text, Raj Kapoor was another text, and Randhir Kapoor was a third text. Now, these are genetic texts. And we know that genetic science tells us that certain diseases, certain illnesses or ailments, pass on or are transmitted genetically from one generation to another. For example, diabetes or cardiac problems or leukoderma. Some of these ailments, continue from generation to generation. So there is some sort of genetic intertextuality. And T.S. Eliot talks about time, temporal intertextuality. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future. Time past and time present are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. We cannot chunk them. We cannot break them into separate compartments. No, we can't, because time is a continuity, is a continuum. Right. Now, in tradition and individual talent, he says something very similar.
Sir, please unmute yourself. Please unmute, sir. By mistake, you have muted. Yeah, unmute the mic. Sir, please unmute. Yes, sir.
Oh,
yeah.
You didn't hear what I said so far?
For 30 seconds, sir. For 30 seconds. Only
Hello?
for 30 seconds, sir.
Okay, I don't know how it happened automatically.
Yeah, it might have happened, sir.
Okay, maybe it was at the other end, your end probably. Okay, so did you miss a lot of things?
No,
Only for
no.
30 seconds, 20 to 30
Okay. So T.S. Eliot gives another example, which can be cited as an example of intertextuality. He says in the essay called Tradition and Individual Talent, he says, no poet, no artist of any art has his complete meaning alone. His significance, his appreciation is appreciation of his relation to the dead poets and artists. You cannot value him alone, him or her, right? You cannot value him alone. You must see him for contrast and comparison among the dead. What happens when a new work of art is created is something that happens simultaneously to all the works of art which preceded it. So there is a tradition. And when I write something, some novel or story or poem, that particular literary work produced by me becomes a part of the whole tradition, and the tradition is modified slightly because of my or by my my own contribution, right? So that is intertextuality. So how many terms have we explained briefly? Intention, acceptance, cohesion, coherence, situation, information, intertextuality, and the next one, the ninth one, is context. Context plays a very crucial, very vital, pivotal role in understanding and appreciation of literature or any discourse for that matter, be it spoken discourse or written discourse. I'll give you a simple example. You know, once I wanted to use an elevator or a lift, and it was a skyscraper. It was a tall building, and I was waiting for the lift to arrive on the 10th floor. I was there on the 10th floor. And two women had started using the elevator from the first floor, ground floor. And when the lift approached or arrived the 10th floor, the door opened. I entered. The door closed automatically. And this is what I heard. The two women had already started talking about something from the first floor, and now they were on the 10th floor, and I entered and I heard this, conversation between the two. How did it go? One woman asked this question, how did it go? And the other woman said, not too bad, but I'm glad it's over. And the first woman said, was it the first one? And the second woman said, yes, for the time being. Now, I had absolutely no idea as to what they were talking about, what they were conversing about. And my mind started working because I had no clue as to the context of the conversation that was happening in my presence. And then I said, are these women talking about a delivery of a baby? How did the delivery go? Not too bad, not too painful. I'm glad it's over. Or were they talking about an interview? How did the interview go? Or were they talking about extraction of a tooth? Maybe one of those two women had a sweet tooth and she had visited a dentist for extraction of a tooth. So, I was going through that deconstructivist process, right? Of interpretation, multiple interpretation or several interpretations because I had no context, right? So when I say context, I have to say something very briefly about types of context. There is locational context or spatial context, that the action in a play or novel or story or a poem happens in a certain place. So there is some location, and that location becomes a context. That space becomes a context. And we are reminded of Thomas Hardy's novels in which the location or the locale, right, the Egdon Heath, plays a very important role. In fact, the Heath is an important character alongside the human characters, men and women, for example. So locational context, temporal context. When is the action taking place? Morning, afternoon, evening, in the past, at present? When is the action taking? Where is the action taking place? When is the action taking place? So locational context, temporal context, emotional context, because characters in a play, for example, we can cite the example of any play for that matter, Othello. In the beginning, Othello and Desdemona had a very happy married life, but then Iago started his machinations, his evil designs, and gradually there was some progression in a wrong direction. as far as the marital life of Othello and Desdemona was concerned. So there is some sort of emotional context. And another context which is very important is linguistic context, right? For example, I gave you the example of the moth and the star. A young and impressionable moth had once set his heart on a certain star, full stop. He told his mother about this. Now the word this is related to the whole bunch of words, 10 words in the previous sentence. So that is linguistic context, that when we come across new words in a story or in a poem, we don't have to rush to a dictionary immediately. We can understand the meanings of unknown, unfamiliar, new words with the help of other words which are scattered all over the text, poetic text or fictional text or whatever text we have. Now, there are different devices that creative writers and even ordinary people use to make their sentences stay together, right? In a cohesive text, spoken or written text, the different sentences or utterances stay together, pray together, and say things together, and convey meanings and messages together, right? Now, I've briefly explained some important semi-technical words or terms or expressions so that we will be in a better position to understand the three important theories that fall under the umbrella of pragmatics. And these three theories are the theory of speech acts, the theory or principle of conversational cooperation, and the theory or principle of politeness. Let me say something very briefly about these three theories. As I said, whenever I say something, whenever I write about something, I produce a speech act, right? It's an act. When I say something, it's a speech act. When I write something, it's a written act or written manifestation of a speech act. And there are different types of speech acts. Commissives, for example, I commit myself. I give a promise to Chandalia ji that I'll do something, right? When he asked me to deliver a talk on pragmatics, I said, okay, I'll do that. So I committed myself. That was my commissive speech act. And I also expressed happiness when he invited me. You know, it's a great feeling that your friends still remember you. Your friends still think you can be useful to the teaching fraternity. And that's a great feeling. So I was happy. And that was the expression of my happiness, the expression of my gratitude to Chandalia ji was an expressive speech act. So a speech act can be commissive. I commit myself to doing something. Can be expressive. I express my happiness, my delight, my joy, or my enjoyment, whatever. And then the speech act can be declarations. It can be not declarative, it's called declaration. For example, I declare the seminar open is a declaration. I declare you, man and woman or husband and wife, the priest in the church says. So declarations, commissives, expressives are speech acts. And one more speech act can be directive speech act. And when people ask other people to do something or not to do something, when a mother asks a baby to do something and not to do something, all these do's and don'ts are part of the directive speech acts. As I said some time ago, a speech act can be direct or indirect. Let me give you an example. I always support my statements, my propositions with illustrations from literature, from real life, and so on. In the play Othello enters the bedchamber, Desdemona's bedchamber, and he is in a furious mood. He has resolved in a very demonic fashion to suffocate her, to smother her, to kill her, because he is highly, greatly, haunted with suspicion, with jealousy, green-eyed jealousy. And he says, he looks at his sleeping wife and he says, put out the light. Now there is a candle burning there in the bedchamber where Desdemona is lying asleep. And he looks at her and says, put out the light. Let me extinguish this light, this candle. That is a direct act because he means what he says and he says what he means. He is referring to the actual lamp that is burning, right? He's not referring to any metaphorical lamp. So the first part, he repeats, put out the light and then put out the light. You see, there is repetition, but this repetition is not useless. This repetition is incremental repetition. This repetition is a purposeful repetition, purposive repetition, intentional repetition. The first part is a direct speech act because he talks about the flame, the candle burning there in the bedchamber. And the second part is metaphorical. So it's an indirect speech act. Put out the light, direct speech act, and then put out the light means let me kill her. The first part, let me extinguish this flame. The second part, let me extinguish the flame of Desdemona's life. Let me kill her. So a speech act can be direct or indirect. There are so many examples that can be cited of indirect speech act. For example, when somebody tries to do something and blames not himself or herself, but somebody else, then I can say, oh, nachna na jane angan teda. You don't know how to dance and you're blaming the ground, right? The playground or the space in front of my house. So nachna na jane angan teda. This is one strategy that can be used to perform an indirect speech act. Proverbs can be used, sayings can be used. If I were you, for example, let's say somebody has made a mistake or somebody has failed an examination and I say to him or her, if I were in that position, if I were there in your place, I would not have done it or I would not do it. Had I been in your place, I would not have done it. Or if I were in your place, I would not do it. So I'm just trying to mitigate or reduce the bluntness of my criticism or my accusation or blame. In Othello, for example, let me go back to that wonderful play. In Othello, there is a progression from commissives, as I said. In the beginning, the husband is committed to marital bond, right? He's committed. Excuse me.
Login with Google.
Hello?
No, sir, nothing. So please continue.
Yeah. Please ask them to mute the microphone.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So in Othello, there is some sort of progression from commissives. In the beginning, he commits himself to be with her because she has chosen him and she has broken the bonds that she had with her father, with her family, earlier family. So there is some sort of commitment on the part of Othello in the beginning, and there is a progression from commissive to expressive because he is very happy that she is with him as his wife. And then from commissive, he proceeds to expressives, and from expressives, he proceeds to declarations. Because when the seed of when the poisonous seed of jealousy and suspicion is sown in her mind by Iago, using in his mind, in Othello's mind, using different strategies, but different machinations, he proceeds from commissives to expressives to declarations, and there comes a point where Othello declares Desdemona to be a whore. He calls her a whore, a prostitute. So you see, there is some sort of unwelcome, unwanted, unwarranted kind of progression from commissive to expressive to declarations and directive. The example that I cited 2-3 minutes ago, put out the light and put out the light, is an example of directions given to the self. Now, he's not asking somebody else to put out the flame. He's not asking another person to kill his wife. He's asking himself to extinguish the flame and to extinguish the flame of the life of Desdemona. And that is a directive speech act. So we see the whole play consists of several micro speech acts. Hundreds of micro speech acts are there, and all these hundreds of micro speech acts, constitute a mega speech act. And what is that mega speech act? In fact, Othello, Macbeth, Hamlet, and King Lear, these 4 tragedies are 4 speech acts. What is the speech act in Othello? Right? From the authorial point of view, from the point of view of the author saying something to the audience or to the spectators, it is, don't be jealous, don't be gullible, don't be suspicious. That's a mega speech act. The whole play can be milked into one single mega speech act or one single big macro speech act. And then Hamlet, don't be indecisive. That's a speech act. And then Macbeth, don't be excessively or over ambitious. And then King Lear, don't be impulsive. So each of these plays is a speech act, right? We can describe it as a speech act. So I think this much elaboration about speech act or on speech act is enough, right? Now, the second theory that I'd like to very briefly elaborate on or discuss is the principle of conversational cooperation. Now, when we converse with other people, we generally observe certain norms. And what are these norms? Grice has formulated 4 norms, and the norms are called maxims: the maxim of quantity, the maxim of quality, the maxim of relation, and the maxim of manner. Now, let me very briefly explain these maxims with some examples. Let me talk first about maxim of quantity. Now, I'd like to take you to another domain, and the domain is the domain of research. I'm sure each one of us evaluates or has evaluated some theses and dissertations or project works. Now, my impression of research carried out in recent times is not a very palatable impression, right? My experience has been very disappointing and frustrating as far as research in our country is concerned. Now, sometimes the thesis submitted by the research supervisee is too long. I have seen some theses submitted in 3 volumes, and each volume consists of 500 plus pages. So a thesis comprising 1,500, 1,600 pages. What is this? The person doesn't know the maximum of quantity, right? That we shouldn't be too brief and we shouldn't be too prolix. Prolixity is a disadvantage. Too much of brevity is also a disadvantage. We should be reasonably brief and reasonably prolix. So that example from research domain can be cited as a violation of maximum of quantity. Don't give more information, don't give less information. Give only that much amount of information which is required in the context, right? That's maximum of quantity. We're talking about cooperative principle. The second maxim is the maxim of quality. It says, don't say anything, don't write anything without any proof, without any evidence. You can call Hamlet a comedy. You're free to do that. But you need to substantiate your point of view with textual evidence. I. Richards always talked about textual criticism or practical criticism. You can describe any one of these 4 tragedies as comedy, but justify. You need to justify. You need to support your argument with textual evidence, with proof. And that is what is prescribed by the maxim of quality. Iago, the supreme villain, I think in literature, no other villain is as an epitome as Iago is. In the Hindi cinema domain, Gabbar is probably the best villain. I haven't seen any other villain as villainous as Gabbar is. I haven't read about any other villain as villainous as Iago is. So does Iago have any evidence that there is an illicit relationship between Desdemona, Othello's wife, and Cassio, Othello's subordinate? No, he doesn't have any evidence. He doesn't have any proof. So he makes up, he creates, he concocts evidence, right, to destroy the marital life of Desdemona and Othello because he wants to take revenge on Cassio, right? Just as Satan couldn't take revenge on God and therefore he took revenge on man or through man. Iago cannot take revenge on Othello, and therefore he chooses to take revenge on Cassio. And in the process, the whole, the whole bunch of relationship, the whole bunch of families are destroyed, right? Meet with tragedies. So Iago has no evidence to prove Desdemona as an infidel, but he makes up fake evidence in the form of the handkerchief. The handkerchief becomes a symbol of infidelity, of faithlessness. And that is produced by, that fake evidence is produced by Iago. So he violates the maxim of quality. He has no supporting information or evidence or proof. The next maxim is maxim of relation, right? A thesis on, let me give you an example from research again. Now, when you browse through theses submitted to different universities in India these days, you are disappointed, you are frustrated, because, for example, somebody has done research on pragmatic analysis of a particular novel. Now, the thesis has 5 chapters. There is only one little short, small chapter that talks about pragmatic analysis of that particular chosen novel. And what do these remaining 4 chapters or 5 chapters analysis of the novel, or theme of human relations in this novel, theme of love in this novel? So you see, no relevance. Because the researcher wants to increase the number of pages and the number of chapters, he or she writes something which is not directly relevant. So relevance is an important criterion in research. Brevity and quality. If you are carrying out empirical research, you need to produce empirical evidence. But these days, people just make sweeping statements, black and white statements, blanket statements without supporting evidence or proof. And the last maxim, right? The first one is quantity maxim. The second one is quality maxim. The third one is relation maxim. And the fourth one is manner maxim. That is, whatever we want to say, we need to say clearly, explicitly, unambiguously, right? But paradoxically enough, just as Aristotle talks about the paradox of tragedy, that when we see a tragedy on the stage in a theater, right, we feel happy. We feel happy because there is a catharsis of excess amount of pity and fear in our mind. So we feel relaxed, right? So that's the paradox that Aristotle talks about when he discusses the nature of tragedy. So here is some sort of similar paradox or contradiction, because literature is literature, literature is enjoyable, literature is interpretable, because literature is ambiguous. And I remember the ending of the short story by Rabindranath Tagore, The Homecoming. The very last sentence of the short story, if I'm not mistaken, is this: the holidays have come. Now, it's an ambiguous ending. The story talks about a boy whose name is Fatik, and he comes from a village. He is a very naughty boy, and therefore his mother decides to send him to his uncle, that is her own brother. And the brother lives in Calcutta. But his aunt, his uncle's wife, his mother's sister-in-law, is a very cruel lady. And she treats him very mercilessly, ruthlessly, cruelly, shabbily, and he feels very homesick, right? And the mental loneliness, the mental isolation converts itself into physical illness or ailment, and he starts burning with fever, right? And finally he succumbs, to fever. He dies, right? So these maxims need to be understood when we talk about pragmatics, right? The last one, we briefly talked about conversational cooperation, cooperative principle. Before that, we spoke about speech act theory. Now, the last one that I want to talk about very briefly, if possible, is the politeness principle. Now, when we discuss this principle, we need to keep certain words in mind. And these words are very key words. They are just as in a paragraph, there are key words and topic sentences or a topic sentence. In politeness principle, in discussion of politeness principle, there are certain words we need to understand. The first word is face. Face means image, that I have two faces. I have my private face and I have my public face, right? One of my faces is private and the other one is public. I have a positive face and I have a negative face. What does positive face refer to? You know, when people pay compliment to me, when they praise me, when they congratulate me, right? When they give me gifts, when they invite me, I feel happy because they are doing something to satisfy my positive face. But the other face is negative face. And negative face refers to criticism. If you criticize me, of course, I always welcome criticism and feedback. I'm just giving an example, hypothetical example. If you criticize me, I may not be very happy. I may feel hurt, offended. So criticizing, accusing, blaming, dispraising, advising, rebuking, getting angry are not very pleasant acts or speech acts. So in these cases, we need to be very careful. When I agree with you, I can agree with you in a very direct manner. I agree with you. I couldn't agree more with you. There is no face threat. There is no threat to the face of the listener. And therefore, I don't need any verbal padding. I don't have to say, can I say, or if I may say so, and so on and so forth, or excuse me for saying so, because I'm doing something very positive, something very pleasant from the listener's point of view. So I don't have to be careful, but I have to be very cautious when I perform unpleasant speech acts like criticizing people, advising them, blaming them, and so on, so forth, right? Politeness principle also says, don't impose things on the hearer, give the hearer options to say no, and make the hearer feel happy or comfortable. So face is an important concept. Positive face, negative face. Face trait is another concept. And the word maximize is also very important in the discussion of politeness principle. What do we maximize? We maximize benefit to the other, to the listener, to the hearer, to the addressee. We maximize benefit to the other. We maximize agreement with the other. We maximize praise of the other. We maximize sympathy with the other. And when I talk about myself, I maximize not praise, not self-praise. If I say, oh, I'm a very good speaker. Oh, I'm a good scholar. Then you will start laughing and you will start making fun of me. Oh, this man is arrogant. He's not polite. He's not courteous. He's so full of himself. He thinks no end of himself. So, as a polite person, I'm not supposed to maximize my own praise. I'm supposed to maximize dispraise of myself. That's why in Hindi we say, "Are yaar, main bhi kitna gadha hoon. Are yaar, main bhi kitna ullu hoon. मैं भी कितना बेवकूफ हूं." I call myself Gadha, Ullu, Beokoof, but I will not call Chandalia ji Gadha, Beokoof, Ullu, right? He's not at all like that. He's a very wise person. But even if he was like that, I wouldn't describe him like that, because in that case, I would be threatening his face, his negative face. So I maximize cost to myself. I maximize benefit to him or her. I maximize cost to myself. I maximize sympathy with him, for him, and I minimize sympathy for myself. I maximize praise of him. I maximize dispraise of me. Right? And the language that we use is also, evidence of this kind of operation of the politeness principle. Of course, politeness differs from culture to culture. Body language differs from culture to culture. What is acceptable in one culture may not be so in another culture, right? And when I say body language, I mean gestures, facial expressions, distance that we maintain between the speaker and the listener, and eye contact. All these things differ from culture to culture. right? We cannot make a general blanket statement. And that's why the pragmatics of Western countries is different from the pragmatics of Asian countries, especially South Asian countries, right? Because the way we coax our guest, right? The way we describe our own belongings differs from the way they describe their own belongings. For example, I say, my house may be a mansion, but I will say, अरे यार, मेरा घर तो एक झोपड़ी है, आ जाइए, आप आने से बाहर आ जाएगी. So whatever belongs to me is very ordinary. Whatever belongs to you is extraordinary, right? Example, आप हमारे गरीब खाने पर तशरीफ लाएंगे तो हमारा सौभाग्य होगा. आप हमारे गरीब खाने पे, my house may be a huge mansion, but still I cannot describe it as mansion, as Raj Mahal. I will always describe it as a hut, as a cottage. So आप हमारे गरीब खाने पर, my house is the गरीब खाना, your house is the दौलत खाना. My visit to your house is हाजिर होना, and your visit to my house is तशरीफ लाना. So आप हमारे गरीब खाने पर तशरीफ लाएंगे तो हमारा सौभाग्य होगा. हुकुम कीजिए साहेब, आपका यह गुलाम आपके दौलत खाने पर तुरंत हाजिर हो जाएगा. Right? हुकुम कीजिए साहेब. So you, the listener, is a sahib, and you don't make a request, you issue an order. Right? हुकुम कीजिए साहेब, आपका यह गुलाम. So I describe myself as a slave, not a literal slave. This is the politeness strategy. This is our culture, right? Though this culture is slightly changing, but in the West, they will not. They will be shocked. Why is this man calling himself a slave? Right? Is he a slave? Slavery is over. It was there in America several decades ago. It was there in South Africa. Sorry, it was there in South Africa. Yes, it was there in another form in India, right? Why is this man talking about this? So when we discuss politeness, we need to understand the concepts of face, positive face, negative face threat, imposition, giving options, maximization, minimization. We also need to understand the tax maxim, tact. We need to be tactful. And I would like to conclude my talk with the narration of a folk tale from Telangana, Telugu folk tale. Once there was a dispute between two goddesses. And who are these two goddesses? These two goddesses were the goddess of wealth and the goddess of poverty. The goddess of wealth thought that and said that she was more beautiful than the other goddess, the goddess of poverty. And the goddess of poverty was of the same opinion, that she was more beautiful than the goddess of wealth. And the dispute continued for a long time. They couldn't settle the dispute. Finally, they decided to approach a komati. Komati in Telugu means merchant. The merchant thought for a while, and he said to the goddess of poverty, "Oh, goddess of poverty, you look hypnotizing, mesmerizing when you turn your back on me and go away." And the goddess of poverty thought that he was declaring that she was more beautiful than the goddess of wealth. So she turned her back on him and she went away. Then he turned his attention to the goddess of wealth and said to her, "Oh, goddess of wealth, you look gorgeous, you look magical, you look transporting, electrifying when you come closer to me." And as a result, the goddess of wealth came closer to him. He became rich. The goddess of wealth, the goddess of poverty went away, so he could save himself from becoming, from reducing to poverty, from becoming poor. And when the goddess of wealth came closer to him, he became very rich. He was very tactful, and that's why he could please both the goddesses, the goddess of poverty and the goddess of wealth. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. Let me once again say a big thank you to my friend and colleague, my brother Chandalia ji, and my sister Rajul Bhargava ji, and my other colleagues for this wonderful opportunity. It was indeed a pleasure. So now the session is open for questions and answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. What an insightful lecture. Each word has become a golden word. And this is just like a Bollywood, sir. If on Friday, when movie gets released and cinema hall is filled with the audience and everybody is clapping, so same thing has happened today. And I'm sure these 7 days will be similar. So before I ask Madam Rashri to propose word of things, I'll take 2-3 questions.
Please, please.
Okay, Meenakshi Jain has a question, sir. Why should we call genetic connection intertextuality?
Because there is intertextuality, you know. My father, I've inherited, genetically inherited certain qualities, physical qualities, mental qualities, and so on and so forth from my father. And my children have also inherited, genetically inherited certain qualities from me and my father. So there is a science called genetics. And as I said some time ago, certain ailments, you know, pass from generation to generation to generation. So there is some connectivity between 2 generations or 3 generations or several generations. And this has been proved. There is a whole science, genetics.
Sir, my question is, with the name, why do we call it intertextuality? There is definitely connection, genetic connection, but why do we need to call it intertextuality? That
Then how would you describe it?
only genetic connection is enough. That is my objection. That is all.
So you are saying connection, I am saying intertextuality. It's a matter
so this word seems so very inappropriate in this context to me.
That's your perception, but I don't think so.
That is solely my perception. So I was just wondering why do we need to call it intertextuality, which is so very specific to text.
No, but you know, a person is also in semiotics. A home is a text. A person is a text. A book is a text. A particular room, bedroom is a text. A hall is a text. Kitchen is a text. So in semiotics, we study all these things, right? And all these things are called texts.
Yes, maybe. I haven't been into those details of the semiotics or linguistics.
Yeah, and you know, please understand, all my examples are my personal examples. You know, I don't do bookish things.
No, I loved Othello's interpretation from this viewpoint very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Sir, we'll take one more question.
All right.
Kumar has a question for you. Please discuss about intertextuality and intratext. I think it has been already discussed. Please.
This has been asked by 2-3 participants.
Okay.
Please explain in brief intratext. You know, intratext and intertextuality. I guess a lot of confusions.
They want to understand the exact distinction between intratextuality and intertextuality.
Yes.
Now, I don't know whether you are aware of, multiple intelligence theory, right? Gardner talks about multiple intelligence. For example, musical intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, interpersonal intelligence. Those people who possess interpersonal intelligence are very good public relations managers because they know how to handle each person properly, right? So the relationship between the manager, HR manager, and the HR or human resources is a very important matter, crucial consideration. So intra means, you know, for example, you take a poem, right? I'll give you an example. Whose woods these are, I think I know. This is Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. Right? Now, this is the first verse, first stanza of the poem, Stopping. So, do you think there is some connection between the first stanza and the second and the third, and the third and the fourth? Do you think there is some sort of relatedness? Yes or no?
Yes.
Do you think there is some relatedness?
I don't exactly remember, but I think yes.
No, there is nothing to remember. What I'm saying is the poem has 4 stanzas, and all these 4 stanzas are cohesive as well as coherent. And all 4 stanzas belong to one text.
One text and one
So we are
thought.
talking about different parts of the same text in intratextuality, right? In intertextuality, like intranational and international. When we say international, we talk about different countries. When we talk about intranational, we talk about the one country, same country, right? So when I compare, for example, when I discover some connectivity or relatedness between 2 daffodils by Robert Herrick and daffodils by William Wordsworth, these 2 are different texts.
Yes.
And the connection that I discover between these 2 poems on daffodils is a matter of intertextuality, because I'm talking about 2 separate texts. So when I talk about 2 separate texts and the relationship between these 2 separate texts, I'm doing an exercise in intertextuality. I hope I have made myself clear.
Yes. Yes.